who you are, which is very nice, but no need to do that. As people are still coming in quite quickly at the moment, I'm just going to give it a minute or two, just wait another minute before starting, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, well, I think it's slowing down, people coming in now, and it's a couple of minutes past 12, just coming up to that. So probably time to start. So welcome to everybody to this our Wednesday webinar in our series of webinars during Love Your Burial Ground Week and Churches Count on Nature 2023. For those of you who've been to a few of these webinars over the years, you will have noticed that I am not Catherine Ross of the Church of England. I'm Harriet Carty from Caring for God's Acre, and I'm absolutely delighted to be hosting this webinar. Caring for God's Acre has been commissioned to support the work on land and nature. We've been commissioned by the Church of England Environmental Programme. This piece of work only started at the beginning of June, and so my first job actually has been to host these webinars, which has really been an absolute delight. If you missed either of the two that have happened this week, you'll be able to catch up on the Church of England website, and they really were both very well worth listening to. So please do that. As you know, Churches Count on Nature has been running for 3 years now, and the other part of it is people running events involving recording biodiversity up and down the country, including Wales. And this year we've got a bumper crop. We've got over 345 registrations, many of whom are running more than one event. So we're really delighted with the response, and I'm sure some of you listening to this webinar are also involved in these events. And thank you so much if you are. If you're not, have a little look on our website and see if there's something near you that you could go and join into. I think that would be great fun. Just a tiny bit of housekeeping. You've been saying hello in the chat function, but from now on, please, if you have any questions for Bishop Graham, put them into the Q&A, which is the button next door to the chat. There is a function for voting for questions if you want to, which brings the most popular ones to the top of the list. In the previous webinars, we've worked our way through all the questions, so that might not be necessary at all, but please put them in the Q&A. And if there are any links at all that are mentioned during this talk, we will be sending them to you in an email afterwards. So don't feel that you need to desperately scribble them down or try and open them up on your phones or anything like that. Just sit and enjoy the webinar, and all of those links will be sent to you, as will the slides. And the webinar is being recorded, and that recording, along with all of us for this week, will be available on the Church of England website. As I've said, we're now halfway through. This is the third one in this week of webinars. There's 2 more to come, I think, both of which will be absolutely fascinating. So if you're not booked on, there's still time. Please book on to the following 2. But of course, if you can't make it, you will be able to catch up on them. And then there's just a few other things coming along, being organised by the Environmental Programme that might be of interest. The solar panels webinar in June, and also heating solution coming along towards the end of June, and then in October, heat pump training. So please make a note of those if those would be of interest. So I now have a great pleasure of, oh, he's disappeared. No, it's back. Introducing Bishop Graham and handing over to him. Bishop Graham, as I'm sure most of you know, is the Bishop of Norwich and lead bishop for the environment in the Church of England. We're absolutely delighted to have you with us today, Bishop Graham. And I think with no further ado, I'm just going to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, Harriet, thank you very much for hosting this seminar for us, and for your introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar, and for all that you do as eco-apostles in parishes, in deaneries, in schools, in dioceses, and in other ways that you do that. So thank you for all that you engage with. And I'm really excited about this week of Churches Count on Nature, what we can discover about the biodiversity around us. And I certainly live that out in my own garden in the centre of Norwich. And we've been surveying now for 3 years the biodiversity of the garden and trying to make changes to enhance that, which is really exciting to see nature thriving more. I'm going to just share my screen. So I'm just going to do the technical bit of that and hope this works. I hope that's all right. Good. So this seminar is going to be a little bit different from, I imagine, the others this week, which will be more technical in their basis. And mine is both historical, sociological, theological, and ecological, trying to combine a number of different disciplines to ask ourselves how we pay attention to nature, and to frame that within the life and observations of the 18th century natural historian and parson Gilbert White of Selborne, who I have been doing quite a lot of research on in the last year. I don't know about you, but certainly during COVID and that first COVID lockdown that we all faced in 2020, when there were hardly any vehicles on the road and many people who lived in cities like myself, we reported hearing more birdsong during the day, during, if you remember, that half an hour allowance that we had to go out walking each day. And I believe that during that lockdown, many of us experienced the arrival of spring in a different way than we're used to. Perhaps those of you who work on the land or have much more closer association with land and nature will see that every year up close. But lots of people were reporting that they were paying attention more during that first lockdown. Perhaps, of course, it was the inevitable fears that each of us had to different degrees about our own mortality, the potential for our own mortality, that made us experience the sacrament of the present moment in a much clearer way, a way we valued it much more. But in a sense, we saw during that spring, or certainly I did, and I've heard many others report this too, in a new way, how the leaves were emerging from buds, the first flowering of spring flowers, and that brought us some comfort at that time of anxiety and fear. We noticed, we paid attention. Now, Gilbert White, who's really the person behind a lot of what I'm going to say today, who lived from 1720 to 1793, was, as I've said, an 18th century parson-naturalist. He was curate of the parish of Selborne in Hampshire. He was a writer and poet, but a great recorder and noticer. He changed, I think, how we look and think and write about the natural world. And of course, if you go into Waterstones or any other bookshop at the moment, there's generally a table of nature writing. It's become a very much more popular genre in recent years. But White, through his gardening and his walking and his observation, had a growing appreciation of nature as, in a sense, a contemplative life of him watching life around him, the flora and fauna of that small Hampshire parish over many, many years. And in 1789, he published the Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne in the county of Southampton, which brought this fresh and personal vision, describing the behavior of animals and plants, as well as what the different species look like, or when they arrived in this country. He was working out migration before that was fully understood. He was looking at when flowers first flowered. And as a result, he has been called by many the first ecologist, someone who follows the discipline of studying the interaction between organisms and their biophysical environments. So this is a picture of White. We don't have much to go on as to what he looked like. We suspect this is a picture of him. It's in a book in the inside cover of a book that's now held in the British Library, almost as a graffiti image, along with some scores of a game he was playing with friends. But this is in the front of the Iliad, his copy, which we think was an early portrait of White. I was first given a copy of the Natural History when I was 8 years old, and this is the copy. It was given to me by a very elderly man in Edinburgh, and as you can imagine, as an 8-year-old, I was intrigued but not very interested. And in fact, it was kept as a sort of special thing in a bottom drawer, and only really as an adult did I begin to read Gilbert White, particularly when I was studying ecology, and really began to treasure this book. And this has been the focus of a lot of my research over the last year, researching this book, who bound it, who has previously owned it, kind of doing a forensic analysis both of this particular edition, this book, but also the story that it tells and what it can say to us as environmentalists today. And so the village of Selborne, which is in Hampshire, was quite an isolated place. It was reached by deep cart tracks, described by Gilbert White as rocky and hollow lanes, which were mostly impassable in winter. And Gilbert White's writing brought that place alive. As you turn the pages of this book, you enter, you immerse yourself into the landscape and the place of that parish, as Gilbert White's, describes all that grows and crawls and runs and swims and flies within that parish. And one of the things I've loved doing is taking, not this book, but a modern copy, walking around the parish of Selborne today, because much of the field system, the hanger over the village of beech trees, the planting, of course, of the zigzag up the Hanger Hill to the Selborne Common, which Gilbert White carved with his brother, is still there today to go and explore, as is the house he lived in for much of his life, the Wakes. And White kept extensive journals using a pre-printed grid that his interlocutor, Daines Barrington, devised and published. He was a publisher, particularly around natural history ideas, and he published this journal that people could have to fill in. And this is Gilbert White's writing of some entries in that. So it's not a very clear picture. I had to find it from the internet because the British Library won't allow you to photograph its copies of this. But it records, first of all, the temperature, the pressure, the wind direction, the speed at different times of the day, and also the rainfall. And there are other columns for noticing when species of tree first came into leaf, when fungi first appeared, when plants flowered, when mosses vegetated, when birds and insects first appear and then disappear, and observations with regard to fish and to other animals. And then there's this wonderful column at the end, this miscellaneous observations, which is the column that White uses most, and fills it with all sorts of tantalizing and intriguing observations. And what this did for the first time was to ask of amateur naturalists to record with some precision their observations. And so that as these journals fill up from year to year, you can start comparing from year to year these different things, what happened on the same day each year or the same week. And Barrington's vision was that this recording system could be replicated across geography as well as time. And in the preface to his notebook, he speaks about the very best and accurate materials for a general natural history of Great Britain. So he had this vision that lots of different amateur naturalists will be filling this in to then create and coordinate a great natural history of these isles. And that would then, just be one chapter of an immense natural history of the whole of life on Earth. And White kept these journals for many, many decades. He had one set, which was the garden calendar, which was kept from 1751 to 1771. And it records the life of the garden in the wakes. So, when there's a plague of slugs, it's recorded, or when Timothy, his tortoise, goes missing, it's all recorded there. And then there's these naturalist journals, which he kept from 1768 through to 1793. So this extensive period from 1751 to 1793, over 40 years, where he was daily recording. And when he was away from Selborne, he would have people fill it in for him, so that he kept all these records. And so his record keeping was a kind of early journalism, as they strove to tell the story of one place through time. And he puts all the flora and fauna, which he discovers and finds, where it belongs, placing it in its place. And the remarkable thing is that you can still, as I say, go and identify the fields and the woods that he mentions. Now, his famous book, The Natural History of Selborne, The Natural History and Antiquities of Selborne, was published in 1789. And this book, which I showed you my copy of earlier, is the collection of letters that White was writing to two people. So to Daines Barrington, who was the inventor of this grid recording system, and Thomas Pennant. And they were his near contemporaries. Pennant was 12 years older than White. Barrington was just a little younger. And so the letters that he wrote span the period from 1767 to 1787. So 20 years of letter writing to these two people. And about a third of the letters in the natural history that was published actually were never sent. About a third were just created for the natural history as a literary device. And as you read the natural history, there's a wonderful sense of localism. And this was in sharp contrast to what else was going on in the natural history world in that period, because you had, on a global scale, people like Sir Joseph Banks, who, so sorry, just before I go on, this is a picture of the manuscript of the natural history of Selborne, made up of this collection of letters. And some of the letters, when you explore this manuscript copy in the British Library, still have their seal and the folds in the paper where they went through the post. Others, you can tell, never were sent, and they're collated together like a scrapbook now. But as I say, what White was doing was this very local project, where on a world stage you had people like Sir Joseph Banks here on the left, who was exploring Tahiti and New Zealand and Australia with Captain James Cook, bringing back specimens, recording specimens. And you had in Sweden, Carl Linnaeus, who was at the center of a great global endeavor to classify and name species according to a scientific formula. It was the age of categorizing. And White had knowledge of both of these people and their work, and was using some of the Linnaean classification and some of the classification that John Ray had earlier brought in. So throughout the natural history of Selborne, you have such wonderful different descriptions. So you have, him writing in 1769, large flocks of goldfinches. The sun is very hot. The air is full of spiders' webs. Or in August 1773, the male and female ants of the little dusky sort come forth by myriads and course about with great agility. Or bats drink on the wing like swallows by sipping the surface as they play over pools and streams. Or the crocuses make a gaudy appearance and bees gather on them. The air is soft, violets blow, snow lies under hedges, men plough. A beautiful sort of way of almost rhyming little poetry in his entries about what he's observed on a particular day that has struck him. And of course, White's records teach us so much today. They teach us about climate change. The swallows and swifts that White records are now arriving in southern England, in Hampshire, about a month earlier than they were in White's day. Plants are flowering earlier with a warmer climate. We observe pollution. In fact, White records this cloud coming from the direction of London, an early indication of the London smog. Or we can see how biodiversity collapse or gain has also happened, where species that White records, some of them in great abundance, are now extinct from Hampshire, whilst new species have arrived. But what I really want to do in this seminar is to focus on his skills of attention and openness to wonder, and how they might be part of seeing our planet and the whole of creation that we share it with in a different way. Because White paid fastidious attention to what he saw around him. He was always keen to measure and to observe thoughtfully, to make accurate records, to classify, to analyze, to share his findings with other writers, and to make deductions from his observations and his experimentation. This was a patient observation, connecting with the natural world, but avoiding any sense of sentimentality. And to give you an example of this, let me describe to you how he observed swifts. He was trying to work out so much about our migratory birds, and his brother was a chaplain for the garrison in Gibraltar, and they were in conversation about what was flying over Gibraltar, and he was trying to work out what is going on, because at the time the prevalent view was that swifts and swallows buried themselves into the ground to overwinter on the edge of muddy ponds. But without the power of binoculars, he observed this attentive watching. And so he observed swifts and was the first person to record the mating of swifts. Again, this was not done with binoculars, just acute watching. And so he wrote to Daines Barrington with a rich description. The swift is almost continually on the wing, and as it never settles on the ground, on trees or roofs, would seldom find opportunity for amorous rites, was it not enabled to indulge them in the air? If any person would watch these birds of a fine morning in May, as they are sailing round at a great height from the ground, he would see every now and then one drop on the back of another, and both of them sink down together for many fathoms with a loud piercing shriek. This I take to be the juncture where the business of generation is carrying on. So White chooses to notice, and his records and his letters show what he has chosen to notice and to record and what he's chosen not to. He was not afraid to say when things that he observed were complicated or that he didn't fully understand them. But in his contemplative walking, almost going from plant to plant, he was doing so with his eyes wide open, his ears listening, attuned to what was going on. To see and to listen is to give attention to what is all around you. And White has a wonderful phrase. He calls it watching narrowly. In a letter to Pennant about migratory birds, he describes how I watched them narrowly this year. And he was able to note the behavior of chaffinches, saying, when I came to observe them more narrowly, he saw this and that. Or to Barrington, he wrote how swifts' nests are often hidden. They cannot be so narrowly watched as those species that build more openly. Now, this opens up for us a whole conversation about attention. Attention is there's a picture of a swift that I should have shown you slightly earlier. But attention is the original currency that we have. The words that we use to describe attention give us a clue to how we view it. We say that we pay attention, creating a kind of financial transaction, indicating there's a cost to what we do. And interesting, in other cultures, that's different. The French say that they make attention. The Spanish lose it. The Finnish attach it. And in Hebrew, you set your heart to it. I rather like that Jewish way of setting your heart to something. And it, I think, asks of each of us, what do I set my heart to? What do I pay attention to? What might the world be like if attention was of the heart and not of the wallet? And whilst Gilbert White's attention was not certainly initially monetarized, for the majority of his life, his looking and his listening was purely of the heart. He set his heart on the ordinary capacity of noticing the natural history of Selborne, to study attentively, to make those connections, to delight in the place where he lived out his days. And for White, attention was always orientated towards something beyond himself, though his contemporaries generally did their attending not to the live species that Gilbert White watched and observed, but to dead specimens. Much of the scientific conversation in the period around White was examining dead species, particularly of birds and mammals, of examining the plumage, the dead animal, opening it up to see what it had been eaten. What Gilbert White did was to observe those same birds in their natural environment, watching how their behavior was happening. The original behavioral ecologist, seeing what was going on. He paid attention. So he was curious about birds' habits, their flying, what they ate, their mating, and their flying, and their nest building. Friends, I think we have a problem in our age, and that is a problem of attention. Our attention is being competed for. Apps and adverts precisely want to capture our attention. They're greedy for our attention. Attention is baked into their software. Advertising and marketing is based on buying and selling attention. Attention, therefore, is a very valuable commodity. We're at the mercy of ever sophisticated algorithms wanting to interrupt us. I don't know about you, but I can be so easily interrupted if I've got my phone not on silent and it pinging away, takes my attention, my looking away. I think Banksy, the street artist, captured something of this in this graffiti from 2014, painted on the Broads Plains Boys Club wall in Bristol, entitled Mobile Lovers. This embracing couples set against the darkened doorway to suggest an illicit meeting, who are simultaneously each hypnotized by their mobile phones, embracing each other whilst looking over each other's shoulder. They are present to each other, but also absent to each other. And I wonder, how can we be both present and absent to nature? We can be connected with anywhere in the world, and that ping or buzz of an inbound email or text or message instantly grabs our attention. But whilst we can be so connected with anywhere in the world, we can be so disconnected with the nature, the creation of God all around us. The business case for most apps and online platforms is based on engaging as many users as possible for as long as possible, so that they can enhance the potential revenues from advertisers. They grab and they hijack and they prey upon our attention. So I wonder, how can we reconnect again with nature all around us? How can we acknowledge this hardwired psychology within us of what the ping might be doing to the primitive part of you and me that makes us become more alert to what might be happening, as if it was a twig breaking in a primeval rainforest, sending shivers down our spines. How can we be less attuned to that and more attuned, retraining ourselves to attend to watching nature? Now, there is a common myth that we have less attention as a human species now than a goldfish. This was based on a 2015 Microsoft Canada report, which suggests that the attention span of someone in 2000 was 12 seconds, and this had reduced to 8 seconds in 2013. This, the report said, was less of an attention span than a goldfish, though actually no data supported that point. The considered view is that the average attention span of a human being is 65 seconds, but there's no evidence that it's declining. But to observe closely, to have this narrow watching, as Gilbert White spoke of, nature all around us, we need to develop our attention, our close looking, our watching narrowly. And that takes time to settle down and to watch and to wait, to see with that attentive clarity that Gilbert White is able to. White advised Pennant about a trip that he was about to embark upon as a naturalist to Scotland to collect flora and fauna. And his advice to him, Gilbert White's advice to him, was not to hurry. He wrote to Pennant, "The usual bane of such expeditions is hurry, because men seldom allot themselves half the time they should do. But fixing on a day for their return, post from place to place, rather as if it were on a journey that required dispatch than as philosophers investigating the works of nature." How contemporary when we have to take our photo in a place and post it on social media to prove that we've been there or seen something, rather than observe all that's going on around us more attentively and closely. What one does get from Gilbert White's writing, from the records that he was keeping, is that he was not getting a sweater recording all that he did. About 60,000 entries in all over that period of 42 years. White had this detailed observation, as if he was looking for the pearl of great price and finding all sorts of other things along the way, discovering too the communion of all things in a larger whole. Indeed, the advertisement for the first edition of the Natural History of Selborne summarized White's aim when it said, "If the writer should at all appear, have induced any of his readers to pay a more ready attention to the wonders of the creation, too frequently overlooked as common occurrences, his purposes will be fully answered." When we attend to the natural life around us, to the joy and wonder of creation, so we do so with a more multi-dimensional gaze. No longer is it just an instrumental understanding of something with a name, or to classify it into a group, or to discern what use it could be to us. But as we sit, we begin to rejoice in the other's existence and in their being simply part of creation's great interconnectedness, being there simply for being there. Now, of course, there's always a limit to this, as we can never fully understand the other. But we can, I would suggest, with Gilbert White, wait and watch. And as we do so, sense more, because we look in a way that helps us to begin to know. And as we begin to know more, we begin to understand them. As we attend to, what we attend to or decide not to attend to is, of course, the root of what we love and desire. If we are no longer attending to nature as we once did, no longer see that it's precious, is that why we seem to not notice its destruction or be indifferent to its loss? Or I imagine with many or most or all on this call, those of us who do attend to the natural world, when we see it as less vibrant than in our youth, notice fewer butterflies or less birdsong, we need to reckon with a deep sense of loss and lament. So I think this is all connected spiritually as well. Just as when I sit in church or early each morning in the cathedral in Norwich, waiting and watching on the Lord in the company of saints and sinners, living and departed, so I can have a similar watchfulness in the natural world. Of course, the early Christians had that strong sense of training themselves to pay attention in prayer, attending to themselves, to others, to the world, and to God, to see the sacrament of the present moment. And Douglas Christie argues that in an age of ecological crisis, the very fabric of life continues to fray and tear. And we need to be able to apprehend the whole, to see all things that's existing in intimate relationship with one another. And that has never been more necessary. So mining the skills of contemplation and recultivating the art of focused attention, of encompassing awareness, might that just rekindle a life-enhancing way of looking at the world, of our connectivity with it, rather than the life-denying, life-destroying ways which we are so complicit in. Perhaps this is where we can begin to find healing for ourselves and for the whole of creation. Understanding how deeply connected we are to every living creature and the land in and on which we live and move and have our very being. In so doing, we learn again about community, about connectivity, about beauty and mystery. And so I think we begin to sense something more of what the joy of life, the joy of the kingdom flourishing is like. And it's also a way of modeling our lives on the life of Jesus. His life was full of paying attention from the moment of his birth, those who watched and waited, including the shepherds and the magi, of Mary treasuring things in her heart, the treasuring and pondering, describing awareness and attention. Or Simeon and Anna in the temple with their attentiveness. And we see in Jesus how he frequently took himself away to places of solitude, often in the early morning, for that sustained attention directed towards God. All too often, his disciples kind of catch up with him and find him, wanting to distract him towards another task. But when he engaged with those tasks, with the hungry and the hemorrhaging, the lepers and the lame, Jesus' sustained attention was focused on that individual. His eyes met their eyes with compassion, and his deep attention was experienced as love. And of course, he told the story of how a man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and no attention was paid to him by two who passed by, but a third paid attention to him and took care of him. Do likewise. And when we consider how he noticed the birds of the air, the lilies of the fields, the different types of soil and growth of seeds, the choking of thistles and the fullness of trees, there's something that Gilbert White is mirroring in noticing all around him. Gilbert White's surviving sermons are as if written to a totally different world. There's very little inclusion in his sermons of any natural history. But in those days, I wonder if this might be revived. The clergy preached the same sermon multiple times to the same congregation. I think there's one of Gilbert White's sermons that was preached over 15 times over a number of years. Either that was lazy or he wanted his message to get home. But one of the texts he most frequently preached on was "Consider the birds of the air." And in that sermon, he says, "They're worthy of attention, worthy of observation, and please me much. We were all struck with wonder. All nature is so full." And I think when we pay attention to nature, wonder is rekindled in us. You know, if I'm looking through my binoculars at an osprey's nest in northern Scotland, or simply observing, as I was digging my first potatoes the other day, a blackbird singing just within feet of me as it was looking for worms that I was digging up. For me, that kindles wonder and awe at God's creation, wants me to care for it and protect it yet more. With the art of attention, we see the great web of connectivity. We see creation's loveliness, its goodness and its beauty. It's also its scariness and harshness. But it's a rekindling of that life-affirming, world-affirming horizon for a relationship with creation. And White influenced many, many people in his life, I guess including me. And he's rightly honored as the founder of ecology. Samuel Taylor Coleridge could then look up and write, "There have been times when, looking up beneath the sheltering tree, I could invest every leaf with awe." And William Wordsworth spoke of the deep power of joy we see in the life of things. Friends, when we recognize awe and wonder, we are also on the threshold of worship. Gilbert White leads us to a different and fuller way of seeing. A parson-naturalist who watched narrowly so that more could see rather more fully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop Graham. That was fantastic. I was just about to say, can you stop sharing, but you've done it. That was brilliant. We have one question in the Q&A and also one in the chat, which I'll read out to you in a moment. But I just have a question myself, actually, which would perhaps give people the chance to put some more questions up if they have them. Mine's about migration. I'd always thought that White put forward the theory that birds were actually overwintering in sort of holes, swallows were overwintering in holes in the sort of river and pond banks. And so I was particularly fascinated to hear that he was in correspondence with his brother watching migration in Gibraltar area. Did they realise? Were they getting to the core of what was going on? It's such an odd idea, isn't it, that tiny birds could fly to Africa? It seems much more likely that they go into a hole like animals do. Do you know whether they were sort of
White in his earlier writing is suggesting that, but he pays local boys to go off searching for things, and he does think he finds that happening, but through his writing is this emerging sense of migration becoming much more clearly understood as an idea. However utterly bizarre this seemed, that these tiny animals birds could fly so far away, but it was part of this web of connectivity, this correspondence that he was having with other naturalists as they were working all of this out.
Yes, brilliant. I suppose it wasn't really until we were able to ring birds that we really absolutely could say for definite that they made this sort of mind-blowing journey, and also then found them in the other place, the place where they end up. Thank you.
His influence, was also on Darwin. So I think Darwin rather plagiarizes an idea from White about worms, and how worms at the time of White were seen as not very nice things to have in your garden. They're eating away underneath, gobbling up what you're trying to plant, was the prevailing idea. And White was observing them much more, and having experiments in the garden at the Wakes to understand how they help with drainage, how they help with circulation of pulling leaf matter down into the soil structure. And Darwin then sort of picks up some of these things. And there are some who argue that Darwin rather claimed that as his own idea. So scientific plagiarism.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to start off with Leslie Higson's question from the Q&A, and then move on to the chat one, which was the workload of a parish priest much lighter in Gilbert White's day, or simply less paperwork? I think I've often wondered that, whether they had a much easier time.
Well, the population was much smaller. There were much more clergy around. Of course, he was a curate. And through all his ministries, he didn't have the living, and I think it was a different pace. But I can rather remember that actually from my own childhood in North Yorkshire. Our village had its vicar, and now that parish is part of a multi-parish benefice of probably 8 villages now, 6 churches perhaps. So things have drastically changed. So now I do encourage through ministerial development reviews and things here in the Diocese of Norwich, which is a very good place to come and serve as a vicar if anyone's interested, to have your hinterland, have your other interests in whatever it might be, because I've hugely benefited from that in the different parishes I've served, of just having things that are interesting, that are beyond the life of the parish, to resource and encourage you. And I think there are a few clergy I'm in touch with who still enjoy natural history and take themselves off bird watching or whatever. I want to encourage that, because I think it makes us more fully human in the living out of our vocation, whether we're clergy or laity.
Yes. I'm now going to read you the question from the chat, which is from Tim Hughes. It's quite a long question, this one, and quite a meaty topic. So it's: some particular politicians, media moguls and corporate billionaires who are climate change deniers and dissemblers are undoubtedly responsible for contributing to ecocide on an unbelievable scale. As an ecologist and a bishop in the Church of England, should the Church of England consider that the worst examples of ecocide in our world are a mortal sin?
Well, we can always consider things, and Tim, thanks for that question. I think in places we are speaking quite prophetically about these areas. I think we've got to remember that, climate change knows no international borders, and it is the poorest people in the world, and the people with the less ability to bring adaptation or change in their own lives, or who are being disproportionately impacted, particularly women and children. And anything that is damaging the flourishing of all, and by all there, meaning the whole of creation, humanity being part of creation, is not of what God is, what God's kingdom should be mirroring and reflecting and becoming and being. And so I always think the Church of England should be speaking prophetically about such areas.
Thank you, and thank you for answering such a difficult question. In a situation with this, without time to sort of think it over. I think that was a really helpful question, and
I want to think. I want to think more about it. So that's been really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Easier ones from now on, I think, Bishop. Chad sends a lovely question. I'm a youth worker and poet. I've just given up my phone for a year to better understand the connection between stillness, noticing, gratitude, and action. I've found this talk to be deeply moving. Thank you. I'm on our Diocesan Forest Church network, but would like to connect with other like minds nationally. Do you know of any forums or opportunities to discuss these vital themes, ideally in person? This is Chad from Peterborough Diocese, so not a million miles from where you are, of course.
Hey, Chad, well, thank you for that. I did read a book not that long ago about eco church and forest church. I might be able to get that sent out in the email link after this seminar as to what the title was called. I think Steve Hollinghurst has written about this area. I don't know of any network, but others might know of networks that they could put into the chat and share. That would be really, really helpful, because what I am seeing is this is very much an emerging area for evangelism, and I'm having national conversations with the evangelism team, because if we are not credible as a church about the environment, we are not going to attract young children, teenagers, and young adults at all. We've got to be credible in this area, and I'm seeing quite a growth in Forest Church in the Diocese of Norwich. We've just had an outside confirmation course which is being written up in the parish of Reeford, which is great. The whole confirmation course outside in nature, engaging in all kinds of ways. So there's lots of creativity there, but which I see as being essential for evangelism, and we've got much to learn. There's been so for far too long, the environment has been a sort of special interest group for a particular group of people in some of our churches. In a sense, I relate a little bit to fair trade. We used to have the sort of fair trade stall at the back of church that people would buy, and it then became mainstream in every supermarket that you could buy fair trade. I'd like it to be mainstream in every of our churches, that following an environmental way of life that seeks to tread more gently on the earth is a core discipleship value. And to illustrate that, in the Diocese of Norwich, everyone who's confirmed, the bishops here, we give them a hazel tree to show that as their faith lives and grows, hopefully the tree will live and grow as well. But why a hazel tree? Well, because of Mother Julian of Norwich, and held in the palm of her hand something like a hazelnut, and saw in that moment the wonder and awe of God's creation. So all power to you, Chad, and And if anyone has any ideas, then please add them to the chat, or I'll try and find out more information to send out.
Well, there have been a couple of things being popped in the chat as you were speaking. A Forest Church Facebook group has been mentioned. The Hazelnut Community Farm has also been mentioned. I believe that's in Bristol. And I thought, I don't know if people here listened to yesterday's webinar, but the Apricot Centre in Devon was extremely inspiring as well, particularly their work in training and working in bringing cared for children close to nature. And of course, please don't forget Caring for God's Acre, a different theme perhaps, more about pure ecology and management and managing for conservation, but we have a great deal of information to help you with managing and caring for and engaging people with the environment of churchyards. Just shooting back to the question, I'm sort of jumping between the questions and chat, so excuse me if I'm a little bit slow. I think Karen also had asked a similar question to Chad about books and papers available. Oh no, sorry, this is specifically about White's writing and research. So we'll try and pull what we can together to send out in the email, Karen. And Bishop, if you have anything, we'd be very grateful for.
Richard Mabey's biography of Gilbert White is excellent, and please look out for a book that that I'm writing about Gilbert White and his what he can say to the contemporary church. That's taking a little while to write, but I hope perhaps by next year to have that out.
Brilliant. Lucy Isaacson tells us that she uses the stories of the 18th century naturalist, the Reverend William Borlasse, for talking about climate change, and wonders maybe they wrote to each other. And how do you feel we can encourage people to notice when we have to compete and nudge in equally short spans, including those of no faith? I'm just going to say, Lucy, before handing that over to you, Bishop Graham, that we have been absolutely delighted with both the Church's Council on Nature Endeavour and also just generally when we run activities in churchyards and cemeteries, the level of interest and the feedback afterwards, people are really interested actually, and I believe they are more interested since lockdown, when perhaps they really explored their local green spaces than they were before. But over to you, Bishop, because it's your question, not mine.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lucy. I wasn't aware of William Borlasse, so I'm going to know more about that, and I'd be really keen if you were able to send me what you talk about in terms of climate change and him. I'd be really interested to read that. So thank you for raising that. I think that working with children, young people, I go to a number of eco-church events in the diocese, and I'm always intrigued how captivated young people are when things are pointed out. We held a big bug hunt in Bishop's House Garden in Norwich with the Norfolk Wildlife Trust, and it was heaving with people. Any bug needed to fly well away because we're in danger of being caught in a net, and moth trap and various things. People were just fascinated by what was around them, turning over stones, and I was doing that as a kid all the time. But I don't, we've become so often so disconnected with nature, not allowing young people to go off and explore. I was allowed sort of free reign around our village, and I know that's not the case nowadays in so many places, but I loved it when my own children were younger, and they would just go off and explore and come back with things that they'd found, and not see nature as some frightening, the countryside is frightening to be in. So all we can do is encourage people and expose people to that engagement.
Yes, and I do think churchyards are a fantastic middle ground actually for doing that. That's something we've definitely found. They're excellent places for people with reduced mobility, for example, to connect with nature, but also just for people who aren't familiar with being in the countryside, maybe feel they haven't got the right clothes, or they don't know how to map read, or they might be in the wrong place. They really can provide an excellent excellent bridge. Penny Evans has made a very good point of one organisation that we didn't mention in terms of useful information, and that of course is A Rocha and the Eco Church programme and all of the information that they share with that. So,
well, can I just praise and thank A Rocha? We could not do what we're doing at the moment in the Church of England around the environment programme without our partners, and A Rocha is a particular partner who delivers so amazingly with the Eco Church awards scheme. And so I just encourage you, if your church is not yet registered, please register to become an Eco Church. If you're bronze, strive for silver. If you're a silver, strive for gold. You know, that I think is having a massive impact across the Church of England and other denominations. And indeed, there's now Eco Synagogue, and I think there's Eco Mosque being developed. It is having a huge change, and people really enjoy it, engage with it, and it's our friends at A Rocha do a fantastic job.
I think we're thank you very much for that. We're coming towards the close of our questions, but I'm going to end with a lovely one from Rebecca asking if you keep a nature diary yourself, and if so, do you have any tips on how to keep up the habit?
I don't keep a nature diary of general nature, but I keep a diary of my bees. I'm a beekeeper and have 3 hives, and I do write down what is happening in the hives, because that's fascinating to look back on, but also just to keep remembering what I've done, particularly during the swarming season at the moment, to make sure that they're not swarming, you know, to record the number of queen cells I've had to destroy when there's an active laying queen. I also put in other little bits like, you know, when the queen died, I went to tell my bees that the late queen had died, and I went to tell them about the coronation as well, which is a bit bonkers, but it's all part of being a beekeeper, and just enjoying taking, you know, a share in the song of creation, I think. And I note down their behaviour. You know, Easter Day, I went into my beehives, and after preaching in the cathedral in the afternoon on Easter Day, I went into the beehives, and the bees were as happy as they were positively dancing. The joy of the resurrection.
Well, I think on that note, we'll say thank you very much indeed again, Bishop Graham. I also would just like to mention that, as well as that book that you've just mentioned about Gilbert White, there are 2 books that are out now. So if you'd like to hear more from the Bishop, there's Places of Enchantment, Meeting God in Landscapes, and also The Way Under Our Feet, which is the spirituality of walking. So I think having heard you speak, Bishop, I imagine we're all getting a feel as to what a lovely experience it will be reading your books. So I'd thoroughly recommend that people have a look at those. And okay, thank you very much indeed. And I think we'll close there.
Thank you very much, and really good to be part of this. And thank you to all who've been part of it.